So we need one more for a quorum. We'll start with introductions and then we will skip over the minutes and move on to the Best Youth Initiative. So why don't we start over here with Mark?
Mark Fairchild, Executive Director of the Commission on Improving the Status of Children.
Justin Faulkner, Chief Administrative Officer for the Indiana Supreme Court.
Good morning, Chris Naylor, Executive Director, Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council.
Corey George, Chief Probation Officer, Wayne County.
Terry Decker, Executive Director, Division of Youth Services for Department of Corrections.
Dale Devon, District State House, State Representative, District 5, parts of St. Joe County, which is home of the Fighting Irish.
Adam Krupp, Director of DCS, coming to you from Boone County by way of Marshall County originally.
And our online folks.
This is Julia, Youth Representative from Bloomington, Indiana.
Thank you, Julia. Do we have Bernice?
Good morning. Bernice Corley, Executive Director of the Indiana Public Defender Council.
Good morning, Bernice. And we have Representative Summers.
Good morning, Representative Summers, Representative Vanessa Summers, House District 99.
And I am Dana Kenworthy from the Court of Appeals and Chair of the CISC. And with Representative Summers, we now have a quorum. So thank you.
Oh, good. You better be- Yeah, I was almost going to get popcorn first, so yeah.
All right, we'll start with the minutes from the January 2025 meeting. Do I hear any need for edits? I do. Thank you, Representative Devon. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, minutes are approved. We have two presenters today, both along the same theme, and that is chronic absenteeism. So we'll be hearing a couple of great initiatives that are underway, first being the Best Youth Initiative. So I'm going to call up Dana Kunstman and Uma Alawalia. How'd I do? Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Dana Kunzman. I'm with the Forum for Youth Investment.
You got to pull that mic down, baby.
I'm still short, huh?
Yeah, you're still short.
So the Forum for Youth Investment is focused on innovation, spurring innovation, and partnering for results that improve outcomes for youth and families that will help unleash their full potential in education, work, and life. So broadly, the Building Ecosystems for Statewide Youth Initiative is really designed to engage state system leaders in building more effective and nimble youth development ecosystem that will provide opportunities for youth to thrive. And this is in very intentional, authentic partnership with people with lived experience. It also meets states where they are in addressing any identified needs. And specifically for Indiana, we're dealing with chronic absenteeism and truancy. And finally, it's really about facilitating a collaborative approach that is cross systems to improve children, youth, and family outcomes. So with the 5 states that were part of this initiative, Indiana is really utilizing its participation in the initiative to conduct deeper exploration of the drivers around chronic absenteeism across the state. It's an opportunity to incubate potential solutions to scale. We are proactively strengthening, or you are proactively strengthening the involvement and the authentic partnership with people with lived experience. And really, it's about building policy change recommendations as well, working across the youth serving systems. Oops. So a little bit of framing, just very briefly, when we think about the Action Lab, which is part of the phases of the initiative that we're currently wrapping up now, which is the discovery phase, and that's our landscape analysis. So the discovery phase really allowed us to gain a deeper insight into Indiana's chronic absenteeism and the youth serving systems through that a comprehensive landscape analysis. It was generative, it was collaborative. The approach was to identify strengths and challenges, emerging trends, strategic opportunities across the state, that we were also able to explore the contextual considerations that influence how strategic strategies are executed, leveraged, and sustained longer term. The process provided the team with valuable insights into the dynamics, youth and family preferences and their needs, as well as potential areas for growth, innovation, and the effective coordination between systems for support and care for youth. So in the end, what we're really trying to do is develop this holistic understanding of the current landscape so that we will, this will enable the systems that are around the table to make more informed strategic decisions moving forward. A little bit more about the contextual landscape, the analysis. Chronic absenteeism remains a persistent challenge in Indiana, as we all know. So some quick data highlights that I think we're all aware of that I'm just going to gloss over very quickly. Indiana saw 1 to 2% decrease since 2002, but still higher than before the pandemic. The highest rates of chronic absenteeism I think we've all been seeing is around high school, grades 9 through 12. During the 23-24 school year, the chronic absenteeism among Indiana high school students ranged from 19% in 9th grade to 32% in 12th grade. And students of color, particularly Black and Hispanic students, experienced higher rates of absenteeism, 28.5% and 22% respectively, compared to their white counterparts, which was really at 14.4%. So what we also found, the top drivers of chronic absenteeism prior to the pandemic, some of those reasons really included things that we're all very well aware of, academic struggles, chronic illness, difficulties with food and housing, transportation. Oftentimes there were at-home responsibilities. And then some of the top drivers post-pandemic reasons also include those, in addition to other socioeconomic factors, food and housing insecurities, lack of family supports, and additionally feeling unsafe in school or academically feeling disconnected from the academics with no real clear pathway to their future, really seeing what was laid out ahead of them. And so some of those reasons really underscore the urgency for the Department of Education's ongoing work to rethink what high school experiences really look like and ensure families see the value in education. So we're really trying to connect the dots, thinking holistically. So Indiana's home rule is a home rule state, and that really defers to the local control, which really complicates the backdrop against which solutions for chronic absenteeism need to be carefully crafted and customized. And chronic absenteeism is not, it's not only the cause of poor student outcomes, but a symptom of the broader system, which we were finding around fragmentation. So despite expressed concern and some concerted efforts to focus on de-siloing and working together collaboratively, still there's not been a comprehensive integrated approach across all the youth serving systems when it comes to chronic absenteeism. So we're still seeing a fractured response. There's also policy alignment. And so Mark actually will get into this a little bit more as we move forward, but the recent passage of Senate Bill 282, the proposed bill of 482, the progress of House Bill 1098 and 1201 really provides that opportune climate for reforms that are less punitive. And again, Mark will dig into those a little bit. And also when we think of data integration, we know that decision makers need to understand who's chronically absent, why. We need accurate, timely, disaggregated data, which is a crucial component in this effort. So Indiana continues, we have been finding, to build access to robust data that will help identify students who are on track with the early warning indicator system, for example, also with GPS, to really to track those who are chronically absent so they can address the barriers to attendance with proper supports that are holistic throughout the year in order to make impact that's real time. I am going to turn it over briefly to Uma, who will discuss a few of our key insights as we move forward.
Morning, everyone. I'm both short and a little bit tall enough for the mic. So, I wanted to go over a couple of our findings and insights so that as you move forward and do your strategic planning work, you have a little bit more context about where the data and the discovery was leading us, right? So one is sort of the policy agenda around education absenteeism and the role of the SISC itself. As you all sit in the SISC, you have, most states do not have the kind of robust governance structure that you've built here with the SISC. It's really an advantage because all the different partners are sitting at the table thinking through issues that impact the issues that focus on children and youth. And so chronic absenteeism is one of those issues. And so with the implementation of Senate Bill 282, the accountability, the opportunity, if you will, to balance the punitive and the rehabilitative is really powerful. And how the SISC collaborates across agencies to make sure that a JDAI or a CIS or any of those initiatives, City Connects, are all working in a wraparound sort of way to support families and kids. And that's what we're here for, right? Collaboratively, the very purpose of the SISC is to make sure that all the organizations are aligned around providing the necessary supports to children, youth, and families. System leaders and school counselors and staff also want to see increased prioritization within the DOE as it relates to implementation of policies and some more standardization. And we heard this especially from some of the staff who are working in local school districts. They'd like the state DOE to provide some more guidance and direction and not leave it up to each school district, because sometimes school districts have a lot of local variances that are necessary, but there's some things that need to be more structured and driven from the center. Infrastructure and resources, similarly, talking about, looking at sort of the local variances around local leadership. JDAI in one jurisdiction, like in Wayne County, may not look like JDAI in another jurisdiction, even though the core outcomes are the same, but the implementation gets sort of that localized flavor. And fidelity is really important when you're looking at evidence-based intervention. So that's an issue that came up. Resources are also spotty, right? Some counties have more resources, others have fewer resources. And that's not just about taxing authority, it's about where you're putting the prioritization. From an infrastructure standpoint, we heard a lot about transportation issues, for example. When children are in divorced families where there are custody issues, the actual address for transportation ends up being one parent's household. And if they're visiting the other parent and transportation is not coming over there, that can sometimes lead to children missing school days. Not sure that there are easy answers to any of these questions, but these are sometimes resource issues. There were some school districts, for example, that did a 10 o'clock run or a 9:30 run to go pick up the kids who had missed the 8 o'clock bus, those kinds of things, so that you could actually have a way of grabbing kids who missed the school bus because they were waking up late because they're adolescents and they sleep late and the alarm clock didn't work. A mom went to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and there was no one to get the kid up at 8 o'clock, little things. We heard when we talked to the prosecuting attorneys and a few other people, like giving alarm clocks to kids was a really popular strategy to try to get them up in the morning and coming to school. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. Kids turn the alarm off and go right back to sleep, but it was a strategy. And then this idea that, silos remain, and really want to spend a minute talking about that. Across different departments, they have different mandates, right? And they're very laser focused on their mandates and not always thinking about what are the implications. Kids and families touch multiple systems. And you can't just think about, I'm thinking about TANF and SNAP over here, and I'm thinking about child welfare over here, and juvenile justice over here, and childcare over here. It doesn't work, right? The same family is touching all of those systems. And how do you figure out a way to collaborate? And you've heard this many times. That's the very core of the SISC, right? I'm not saying anything you haven't heard. So figuring out how you leverage the SISC to further enhance and support the collaboration across systems. We looked at many promising models over here, JDAI, CIS, City Connects. And then we heard too, and we haven't done a lot with this in terms of digging in, which is the JAG, something to do with employment, right? Thank you, Jobs for Americans graduates. So that was the one that we didn't dig into, but one thing we heard was when children are connected to clubs or sports, or they have mentors and a peer group, right? Or if they're not into the academic and they're into a career pathway, those things keep kids engaged and motivated and coming to school. And often, when you look at the 2.0 GPA requirement, for example, for kids to participate in after-school time activities, the very kids who need to be motivated are sometimes sitting below that 2.0 GPA requirement. And so how do you engage and reach down to those kids and motivate them and create that space? It may not be a teacher, it may actually be a coach who is the one that's motivating them to come to school every day. So those promising models really offer a lot of value. Then let me see, I did that right? Okay, so we had several strategies that we thought as you're launching into the strategic planning phase that you could spend some time thinking about. One is potentially to launch a state chronic absenteeism goal that the SISC endorses, and that you sign on to at the national platform that's called Attendance Works Challenge. And it's a state by state sort of participation initiative, and it has cut chronic absenteeism in half over the next 5 years, kind of goal, right? Setting a goal like that could be really motivating, and you have a stretch, you're reaching for it, and everybody's working together to get there. There's more explicit exploration of funding opportunities. You can't blend federal funds, but there might be an opportunity locally to think about what are the mandates, what's the purpose of each fund? Are there state general funds that could be repurposed in certain ways? Or could you braid funds where you're using the juvenile services funds or the child welfare funds or the education funds to create a menu of services, a service area in the community that's responsive to the needs of kids and families? And that would be a little bit more locally done. But you need flexibility from the state to do that. One of the things we really thought about was the need for a data person at the SISC. You are looking at a lot of data, but there is nobody, like if you particularly wanted to put a query out there or to take all the different data sets coming from all the different agencies and to create a profile of what is exactly happening for children who are experiencing chronic absenteeism, you actually have to go to individual departments and make the query, get the data, and then take a look at it, right? And try to composite it. And I'm sure Mark and Blaine do a really good job of doing that. But really, if you had a data person assigned to the SISC, that those data sets, you could retrieve them and then you could massage them, you could play with them and create the kinds of reports that are necessary for the SISC to do its job. Addressing chronic absenteeism through a more of a rehabilitative and restorative lens. We heard that from everybody, right? Do you want to use the prosecuting attorney's power in more of a way to motivate families and children and youth to fall in line, to be more restorative, to participate in schools, but not necessarily to say, we're going to put every family in jail. And we did not hear that at all in any of our conversations, right? The conversation was much more different motivators work for different families. And this is one more tool in your toolkit. And how do you mobilize that? But related to that, I think we heard there is a move maybe to move attendance with the education security, school security to Homeland Security, and that attendance, if possible, stay in the school system. That was something that was a pretty strong recommendation that came from a lot of the people that we spoke with. And so I think the idea was that keeping it in IDOE will keep it in a space where it can be a little bit more restorative as opposed to punitive. You hear Homeland Security and you think about violence and terrorism and all those kinds of things. And that's not where schools and children necessarily should be treated through that lens. There are, national initiatives and cohorts such as the American Institute for Research as an attendance lab or the National Partnership for Student Success. But that's a bandwidth issue. And we're certainly not saying, hey, do all these things. We're just giving you options to think about. And then in the high school diploma redesign program that is going on, there's a lot of conversation about DOE's accountability system. And attendance is a very small part of that. how do you make sure that there is a focus on attendance and it doesn't get lost in all the other discussion around redesign, around, curricula, which is all important, right? The career pathways, curricula, college education, all those kinds of things. And then as you think about the current data sets that are available, tracking attendance, not just outcomes of Foster and McKinney-Venter kids particularly, is important. Explore the youth YRBS data and the health data. The health department does that on an annual basis. And how do you take that data and look at the well-being of children? And then tracking attendance through the JAG, which we heard was a really powerful initiative that was underway in Indiana. And then overall rates, one of the things we were very intentional about was including youth and parents with lived experience who were struggling with attendance issues or who had struggled and made it. And they had a perspective about what was happening with their peers. And so we want to continue to say that as this group continues its attendance work, not to lose the voices of the young people. They know what's happening on the ground. They know the challenges they're experiencing. And so making sure that those voices are lifted up constantly and every year creating a forum or an avenue for their voices to be expressed, but also including them in any initiatives that you might be starting up. So with that said, I am going to ask Dina to come and wrap us up.
So as we continue to wrap up the discovery phase and the landscape analysis, we are currently in the drafting stages of our final report, which will be shared individually with the folks as well as a group. Mike, thank you. As a group. But the next phase, and Uma and I are actually staying this afternoon to meet with the team and spend a good 3 or 4 hours really digging in and unpacking the discovery report even more so. So we will begin this kind of strategic planning, what we're calling the co-design phase. We're really going to partner. We're not swooping in and saying, this is what we find, this is what happens next. It's how do we build something together that will be sustainable. And so we'll pursue this kind of cross-sectoral approach that will really unpack the findings and our initial overarching recommendations so that it will support a comprehensive identification of the existing gaps, potential policy solutions in more detail, look at some of the delivery systems and standards and best practices to address the necessary structural or relationship related and transformational changes to really make an impact on chronic absenteeism across Indiana. So the team will engage in a process that will improve the efforts of systems and leaders, as well as people with lived experience, learning from and working together. And we're going to be doing this by fostering successful communication and teamwork, laying the groundwork for meaningful and impactful change in a very structured, data-driven, collaborative process, and ensuring the focus actually is paying attention to the key strategies that the team will identify. And that includes careful attention to the actionable steps that are realistic and achievable, setting all the participants and the youth up for success. So we will also have an opportunity to kind of recalibrate based on what our findings were and make sure that these are the priorities given the current climate and context and what we can realistically achieve. And it's designed to really support the participants in shaping the strategy together, establishing the priorities, making choices, and really looking at how to manage resources across systems. And we will draft an actionable strategic roadmap. Right? So it's going to be a structured, data-driven document, a plan integrating broad milestones that we can also work together to monitor achievements and assess results over time. It will be iterative and adaptive, right? This is not a one-shot deal. So we're going to help the team prioritize and create that decision action and support that ongoing communication and kind of governance, if you will, between and amongst the different systems, so that we can remain responsive to the immediate environment and keep youth and families at the center. So thank you.
Questions from the commission?
Not a question so much as a comment. So thank you for that. Thank you. I would say when it comes to resources, right? You mentioned a data person working with this body. I always agree with that. I just want to say as a comment, more of a cautionary approach is that far too often, including in government agencies, for example, any entity, we are bringing in data people and they're collecting information and populating dashboards, which is a great start. But it has to be somebody that can analyze and advise. And what is that data telling us?
Right.
That step gets skipped like every day. Organizations want to have data informing their policies, as I do. We would want the data to help inform decisions that we make. So I just want to caution and throw that out there to say, as recommendations get made for data, I want to be careful about making sure it's a true data strategy and someone who can advise and inform, like, what is that dashboard telling us about the data, not just, here's your dashboard.
Yeah, that's 100% right? So how do we take that data and not collect it just for the sake of having it to post publicly, but really how do we actualize it and learn from it to make changes and pivot real time?
Thank you.
Do you have a timeline for the report and recommendations?
Yes, yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. We are actually truly finalizing it now. So within the next month, literally, what are we in the middle of February? So by the middle of March, we'll have it completely buttoned up, formatted and all, so that we can share.
Wonderful. Other questions?
Judge Kenworthy?
Yes.
Thank you. My question was, I believe I heard that children of color, Black children in particular, were experiencing a higher rate of absenteeism. Can you kind of explain the why it's higher, if there are unique circumstances that are facing that population that we should be aware of?
I think it's true that if you look at educational outcomes overall, and when you look at early warning indicators, the disparities in outcomes between brown and Black children and children, and poverty being an underlying cause, I think it's there throughout, right? It starts very early, from early childhood on up, and it just persists. If kids are falling behind in third grade reading, their outcomes are starting to get worse. If children are not engaged in school, and there was a great report from the Brookings Institute that we saw yesterday, that as children age and get into high schools, the disengagement tends to get, the percentages get wider and wider and wider. And there are many things, right? If kids are coming hungry to school, they cannot pay attention to what's happening in terms of education, right? If children are experiencing poverty in their homes, if they miss the bus and mom is working 3 jobs and there's no way to get the child to school, all those things make a difference, right? How well is that community that's able to support that child and those parents in making sure that students experience success? And I think those differences, those disparities are starting to get wider and wider and wider as children get older. So I think none of this is a surprise. To be honest, when you look at the data, you will see that those disparities are literally like from early childhood on. There's enough to show that. And so the initiatives and what we have to do to tailor both in community and by child become really relevant. And we cannot ignore that. It cannot be a one size fits all that's going to fix everybody's issues, right? So there were issues from I talked about custody and 2-parent households, separated households, and the issues that come with that. There are issues where there's domestic violence in a home, or there's a community that is ravaged by poverty and substance use. And there could be issues that are happening there. There could be times when children need additional tutoring, mentoring supports, and those resources are scarce that children need. So all those kinds of issues, Where English as a second language, for example, when children are experiencing English as a second language early on, they fall behind in third grade reading. And their parents aren't always able to help them, which means you have to put additional resources in the home to help support those children and those parents. And you cannot solve this without engaging parents meaningfully. So all of that is in the mix, right? When you talk about kids in foster care involved in juvenile justice, those children are already overwhelmingly Black and brown. And so how you can't, if you don't bring those systems together to collaborate, which is why I also think that SIST presents an opportunity to build around those. So I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but those disparities are absolutely evident. So thank you.
Thank you. You did answer. Appreciate it.
I think also what you will find with the end result of the report and as we begin the strategic planning process is, to Uma's point, there is not a silver bullet here or one size fits all. And so the hope is that we can work together to create kind of a portfolio of promising and best practices so that we can utilize the data real time, understand the students at that particular moment and juncture, and then create supports and programs that will actually be customized or tailored to that school, that district, that family.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Dana and Uma. I will pause for a moment and ask Allie to introduce herself. Welcome, Allie.
Good morning, everybody.
Just your name and role.
My name is Allie Leonard, and I am a youth representative on the commission. I'm also involved with the Best Youth Initiative. So.
All right, we'll move right into our next presenter, and that is the City Connects program you heard Uma mention just a moment ago. And we have Abe Manlove with us to present. So welcome.
To accentuate the contrast here, but so good morning. My name is Abraham Manlove. I'm a program manager with Marian University, and we help run the City Connects model of integrated student support, or ISS, which meant something very different back when I was in school. But it is a way of holistically approaching and organizing the wraparound support systems that a school may have in it. And here to kind of talk about just a little bit about like, one, how it got started, some of the research background that created this practice, what it looks like in implementation to actually run it. And now that we are kind of halfway through our 4th year of bringing this model to schools in Indiana, some of the positive effects that we've seen so far. So first off, kind of the City Connects model. So this grew out of some research that Boston College, who created the program, did around 20 years ago, which really found out that a student's success, academic success, is based, like 2/3 of it is based on things that are happening outside of the school. So kind of a question, if you would have asked any teacher, they would have said, well, yeah, the reason I struggle with my job sometimes is because of things outside of my control. Boston then was able to quantify that with this kind of 2/3 model is based on out of school factors. And there's a variety of things that go into that, right? And these are not limited to any kind of social economic demographic. Difficult family situations happen everywhere. Housing instability can happen anywhere. Chronic health conditions, of course, you know, again, cross kind of all boundaries there. However, families that have from more resources are better suited to then be able to kind of adapt to those challenges and respond appropriately. Families that are coming from, you know, generational poverty, effects of systemic racism and things like that are going to have a lot more challenging navigating that and figuring out how to address that appropriately. And within those challenges, students then become the symptom holders. Right, so it's an adult problem, but the effects are seen on the kids, and then the kids then bring that into the school environment. There we go. Right, and so the model then is trying to address this holistically. We're going to think about each child's unique development. We're going to see how different parts of that development interact. We're going to be focusing on unique strengths and needs of each child across these different domains. And we know that within a school, right, they are built to address the academic, but they also end up having to figure out ways of supporting the social, emotional, behavioral development of a child. Any kind of health factors come in and affect that child. And then, of course, family situations come in and address that as well. And so instead of just looking at it through an academic lens, and at times thinking about how do we address behaviors that show up in the classroom, we're also going to look at the fact that the root cause of that might exist in a health-related way, or might exist within the family system, and schools need to figure out how to support that as well. Right. And so kind of also looking at like our current model of education is built on efficiency, not necessarily effectiveness. And that's no one's fault, but it's moved to kind of move the kids through the grade levels and try to get them to 18 and become positive citizens, but right, not necessarily taking into consideration that child development does not happen along that linear of a format. We're running along similar tracks of development, but our kind of age-aligned grade system, there's really not scientific evidence for that. It was just an easier way of organizing the schools when we moved from the one-room schoolhouse, right? Kind of like we probably shouldn't put the 17-year-olds and the 5-year-olds together in the same room. We're going to break that up a little bit more, but 5-year-olds have a wide range of development, as do 17-year-olds in that sense. And so how do we respond to that appropriately? Right? We know that especially in today's modern world, a student's home, a school, their neighborhood are all influencing and interacting with each other. Going back to when I was in school, right? When the bell rang and I went home, school was done. I did not interact with my friends from the building unless they were right there in my neighborhood. If they did call me, you know, they had to call the landline and possibly talk to my mom or my dad before they got to me. But in our interconnected environment with phones, internet, all of those kinds of things, like school never stops. If there's a problem in school, it's going to be messaged about throughout the afternoon and in the evening, depending on how with it the parents are. If the device is in the room, like that could continue on until the wee hours of the morning, which is then going to affect how the next day starts. But anything that did not get resolved then comes back and bleeds back into the building the next day as well. The work that I do with about the 15 different schools that I'm in every week, like that's one of the main things that they're talking about, is like so much of our problems are things that started outside of the building, but it's trickling in, and those arguments are taking place in the hallways and classrooms and things like that. Right. And so we can't escape from it. As the parent of a tween and a teen, like I feel it on a daily basis myself. And it's hard to educate the parents on how to necessarily navigate that. and then jump. And that longitudinal information about the child is often lost in that process. And so we put someone in the building that then kind of analyzes the entire building, develops a support plan for each and every student every year, similar to how an academic plan was going to be built for those students. And then there's built-in follow-up to look at it and say, like, is it working? Needs to be tweaked? Did we pick the right thing? Have the needs changed over time? Right? And then employ systems for the accountability and the professional development to help our practitioners be the best at what they can do. Back, and we're back. All right. Which also means, because it's not like there are no opportunities and resources for students around the community and the state. But each one of those becomes kind of its own chaotic bureaucracy to try to navigate. And if you are an under-resourced family, having the time to sit on the phone, to call the 800 number, to then wait, to then go through the different phone tree, only to get to the wrong person, right? Or because some of these systems are antiquated, get to the desk of a person who no longer exists, but that number hasn't been turned off yet, right? Or only to find out that you're not eligible for whatever that group provides, right? It's frustrating, and people end up quitting, and then the kids are the ones who suffer because they don't get the help. And so our core practice then is to help bring some order from that chaos. And so kind of to quickly go over what it looks like. We start with a review of every student with their teacher every year. And that sounds like a lot, and it is, but schools already do it from an academic lens, right? Whether it's some kind of a nationally normed test, whether we're putting in iReady, looking at iLearn scores. Schools are used to organizing to be able to do this kind of work. We just add the holistic element to it. And so they sit down and they review every student, just going through, tell me about Timothy. What's his academic strengths and needs? What do you know about his behavioral challenges? What do you know about the family? And all of that is cataloged as a strength or a need. And then they just kind of keep moving through until they get the entire building done. From that, we know that there's going to be some students that have higher levels of risk and therefore need a more robust review. And this gets brought up in with the MTSS, RTI, whatever alphabet soup acronym we want to throw out there, of the teams that are already existing in the buildings. And because we know that these students are going to need a higher level of support. So schools already using the MTSS model, they kind of know that there's going to be that small part of the triangle that 8 to 10% of students are going to fall in, that like the way the school is currently structured just isn't going to work for them, and they're going to need more. And so our folks help bring in that holistic information of what's going on outside of the building that the teacher, the counselor don't see. That's probably at the root cause of the challenge that they are seeing within the building. We then kind of tier that so that we can have a more organized approach. What are some things that the building can do for everybody that's going to benefit everyone? What are the things that need to happen for resources being delivered in more of like a small group format, where we have smaller groups of like needs or like strengths that can be addressed? And then who are the kids that are going to really need some of that one-on-one type of intervention for this to be effective for them? As with anything, we have to work with the families. If mom and dad say no, it's not going to happen. And so we got to get them on board, but also figuring out what the barriers might be to a child being able to receive that service. Counseling sounds great, but if the parent is going to have a hard time driving to counseling, then we need to figure out a different way of delivering that. Getting an eye exam might be necessary because we've gotten you to school, but you still can't see the board or the computer screen. But if eye insurance, optometry isn't covered, then we need to figure out a resource so that we can get those. And so working with the families to identify those barriers and making sure that the services are happening and being delivered. Then linking with the community partners. So much of this is things that schools cannot do on their own. And so figuring out who is in the community, building the village around that school so that we have a better idea of who qualifies for what, who works with what specific subgroups, so that those resources can be delivered efficiently and effectively as well. And then there's always the question, like, we have to come back and look at, is it working? Why continue repeating an action if we're not getting better results out of it? And so our coordinators that are in the building do follow up with the teachers. What's changed? Have we seen needs lessen? Have we seen needs increase? Following up with the community partners to say, like, are the people showing up for the service that we signed them up for? Do I need to reach out and connect with the mom and figure out what the issue is? And then working with us to make sure that things are being implemented with fidelity to the model that we use as well. Going back, with the community partners, where we also seek to make that a like mutually beneficial kind of partnership between the school, right? It's better for the partners because a coordinator can call and say, like, if you can start a group here, a STEM group, I can guarantee you 15 people signed up for it. I've already talked with them. Parents are interested. I have permission for it. Can you go ahead and get started, so that they're not having to do the groundwork of calling people and recruiting. We've had buildings where they've been able to get a like full-time mental health therapist placed in the building because of the results of that whole class review, where then they were able to work with a group like Aspire or Gallahue to say, like, I can guarantee you the caseload. We need somebody in the building. We can't staff it ourselves right now, right? Or even then looking and thinking, so it's better for the families and the community partners because we're looking at what kinds of services they qualify. What is your insurance? Is it from the state? Is it private? Who can you go to? Do you not have any? And then helping filter them to the right agency at the right time, so that that frustration, does not bubble up and the family is able to continue on making sure that things are filled out, that the schedule is followed, and those services get delivered. One more time, right? And so related to the work of this commission, so like, what outcomes have we seen? So overall, with the 20 years that the City Connects practice has been in existence, kind of these are what we see happen as children move through a City Connect school grade to grade, right? So we start seeing the higher academic performance. Social emotional outcomes are better. Attendance improves, right? And then as they continue on, we start seeing the test scores. We start seeing increased rates of graduation. We start seeing decreases in retention. And then at the high school level, they're more likely to go on to something, after they graduate. The high school graduation rates have improved greatly. It's also kind of a dated metric right now, right? Like you got to have something afterwards to really lead a successful life and have those opportunities and be able to make those choices for yourself. Specifically in Indiana, I'd like to highlight, we haven't had a chance to update this for the slide presentation yet, but for our schools that worked with us in the City Connects model for 2 years, they saw a decrease of 13% in their chronic absenteeism rates. Right. Couple of reasons why that had happened. I reached out to some folks that are based in the schools that we work with. So organizing it in a way where the team takes that whole class review, that holistic information, and divides it up amongst the different support people in the building to then do daily phone calls for their kids that are on their risk of absenteeism list to just kind of find out why. And through that, they were able to identify that there was a number of kids that actually ended up qualifying for McKinney-Vento services. Ones that they didn't happen, they were just kind of couch surfing with different family members and things, not homeless necessarily in the way we often traditionally view homeless, but without those phone calls and without that holistic information, the school never would have known. And so then they were able to start qualifying them for gas cards and other transportation services to help get them in the building. We have other coordinators that then, because of that kind of daily interaction with the family then became more comfortable reaching out about other needs that they were having as well. It was a safe place to express like, I lost my job, or this is the mental health crisis that we're going through, or this is a family member who died and we're just struggling. And then the coordinator was better able to use, again, that holistic information to try to get the right service to that family at the right time to help them with getting to school. And so through that, they've kind of created their own data systems, right? So there's, again, tracking the numbers, but there's people there, to your point, Mr. Krupp, about like who know the names of the families and the kids and are able to do that analysis to say, this is what I think the root cause is. This is the pattern that I've seen, because there's multiple types of absenteeism. Are you just showing up late and missing first period? Are you missing the entire morning and just kind of showing up at lunchtime? Are you missing the whole day? Are you like me during my freshman gym class, where I realized that the teacher took attendance and then we would start doing our morning laps around the gym and I could just slip back out to the locker room and change and take myself somewhere else because people weren't paying attention, right? But without somebody tracking that and noticing the pattern, no intervention ever would have happened because I was already at least kind of documented as being there. And so using that holistic information, teachers are able to identify those patterns so that the coordinator, what we call our City Connects coordinators, are then able to reach out appropriately to figure out how do we address this. Other things that we have seen. So lower rates of being retained. So once you start showing up to school regularly, you're much more likely to keep on track and lose that risk of being retained, which then opens up a door to a whole number of other challenges within that. And so you can see over time, this was focused on City Connects at the elementary school level, but it was reduced over time, and those impacts last, right? We don't see a lot of retentions at the middle school level across the nation. They do start showing up again at the high school level once we're counting credits and how quickly we're moving through accumulating those. And for kids who had City Connects in their building in elementary school, those effects continued and they had a lower risk of being retained at the high school level as well, because they got what they needed in that early intervention type of model. Right? City Connect students also achieve higher on statewide tests. So this is from our folks in Boston that have been doing this a little bit longer. We've seen some similar growth in the couple of years that we've been measuring that here locally, getting ready to do a little more robust research into what the effects have been for the Indiana schools. But that performance continues to improve over time as well. The longer you're in a City Connect school getting those needs met, the better you're performing over time as well. I would also, so if anyone's curious, if you do a quick search for City Connects, our Boston colleagues put out an annual City Connects progress report that has a lot of the more current things that they're seeing in schools, a lot of anecdotes about how the coordinators have been effective in delivering these resources to kids, improving these different outcomes that they're looking at. And so that can be some good reading as well. I'd also like to point out, like, so on with the test scores, like we're seeing evidence of this now with the current NAEP scores that just came out, the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Education Progress, where we saw our Indiana fourth graders perform higher than their peers, kind of decreasing some of those, the challenges that started showing up post-COVID. I thought that was a big dip across the nation. And now that we've had both the literacy focus and a lot of resources being funneled into getting kids into school and providing them what they need, it's starting to take a positive effect as well. So what does a coordinator then actually do? Jumping ahead a little bit, right? So first off, they're doing the City Connects work. They are making those tailored support plans. They are conducting those whole class review meetings. As you can imagine, sitting down and talking about every student in a 400 to 500 student enrollment building takes a lot of time. So they're doing that work. They're getting out there and being the face of the student support work so that community partners know who to contact, so that families know who to contact in that regard. And then keeping those dynamic records so that everything is up to date and we're making data-informed decisions about these things. Well, they're also a participant with larger school programming. When we hire someone to be a City Connects coordinator, they are coming in as a master's level professional. If we can get them with a license, that's great. right? But it's somebody who is not only trained to gather this information, but it's someone who is trained to act on it as well, so that they can teach a whole class health-related lesson, so that they can work with a group of high school students on productive ways of handling and managing their anxiety, so that they can not only create a student support plan, but they can be on the student support plan as well. One of the ways that they also do this, you can see with the little backpack image, they support student transitions. In our K-8 buildings that are still kind of split as a middle school and elementary school setup, they work with the 5th graders and the 6th grade team to help manage that, because there is a shift in what happens when you're going from 5th grade to 6th grade. My own 6th grader did not like it. Elementary school was a lot of fun, and now she's just like, all we do is work, right? So having somebody there that can help them navigate that. When a student transfers, for good reasons or bad reasons, reaching out to that receiving school and say, hey, this is who's coming. This is what we've put in place that was effective. I would hope that you would be able to continue that in your own building. And then in places where we've kind of managed to work our way in and be working with a district K-12, that has proved extremely effective as kids are moving their way through. We've been in it long enough that we have had some chances of working with kids that made that 5th to 6th grade transition and then moved from 8th grade to 9th grade within the same school system as well. And so helping both the student and the family navigate that. Right. And then, of course, like they're working as a school employee. So they're sitting out there, they're meeting families in the drop off and pickup line. You learn a lot about families in the drop off and pickup line. Right. But being able to just kind of also do that initial triage of, that's not the car that brought you yesterday. What's going on? I'm going to go find you and ask you about it to see what's going on, to see, it could be nothing, but it could be something major, that there was somebody went to the hospital or got arrested or worse. And they're there to kind of respond to that quickly and start providing some of those supports. And if you look at, like, there are people in buildings that already do this kind of work, which is one of the reasons it's so great. And so we're there to be kind of the hub of student support and organize all of these other different support roles, not to overstep boundaries, not to step on anyone's toes, but to help the combination of student strengths and needs and the resources available to be delivered more efficiently and effectively. So you'll see that there is some overlap, and that's necessary because it's a big job, and sometimes we have to share the load that's going on within the buildings, but it also allows people that are already functioning in support roles in the building to, one, kind of get back to their original job description. For those of us that have worked in schools for a long time, I've been in the field for 20 years, most of it is existing in that, like, other duties as assigned, right? And you never really get to do the job that you signed up to do. But also that allows people then to focus on, at the adult side, like, where they have a strength and a passion, right? Because I may be the school social worker, but my passion is actually family engagement. And so the City Connects coordinator can then work and take on the burden of, like, oh, you met with this student in a counseling session, a food insecurity need was identified. I'm going to hand that off to my City Connects coordinator to then reach out to food banks, pantries, churches, their own resources to address that, so that I, as the social worker, can then move on to my next client. Or teacher finds out, like, it's been 10 degrees and this student hasn't had a coat. So are you a middle schooler and the worst thing is that your friends find out that you own a coat? Or do you actually not have one? And I can reach out and try to connect you and the family with not just one that will work, but try to get you one that you can be proud of and not ashamed to wear into the building as well. And the teacher does not have to then think about, who can I call? Do I reach out to my own church? Do I pay for it out of my own pocket? I can hand that off and get back to preparing for teaching and learning. So there's some overlap there that allows for some sharing of the burden, but that then really opens up opportunities as people's capacity improves to then kind of focus on those passion projects and things that they're already naturally good at. I liken this a lot to also kind of taking a Mayo Health Center approach to education, where there is that robust team of professionals, And when you go in, you're not just meeting with your primary care doctor about something. You have the nutritionist that you've been working with, the cardiologist that you've been working with, the oncologist that you've been working with, that are all working on your healthcare together, sharing that information across disciplines so that somebody can speak up and say like, oh, nope, there's an allergy there. This isn't going to work, or this medication is going to impact, the surgical procedure that we just went through. And so I don't recommend that, instead of waiting for the mistake to happen. And then we go back and try to fix it. And getting into back to data systems because it's necessary. So we pair with a student's existing like SIS, the student information system that the school or the district is using. Students are imported into what we call our MyConnect system, which then allows for where we kind of house all of the City Connects work. So the results of the whole class review, all of those different individual student support plans exist in this space and then can be shared with the different professionals within the building that interact with that student. It's capturing a narrative, it's documenting the unique strengths and needs, but then we're also able to report on that, kind of aggregate it, and then talk with the building about like, so these are the trends that we're seeing. And being able to analyze, is it a building-wide issue? Is it a grade level issue? For again, those of us that have worked with schools, sometimes like every once in a while, there's a grade level that moves through and you can just kind of follow the wake of everything good or bad that happens behind it, right? And then the next one will come through and it'll be a different experience, but we're able to analyze that from building level, grade level, classroom level, down to student level, so that then resources and materials can be allocated appropriately to try to address those needs and to capitalize on those strengths. We've also been able to use this information to pair with the Mayor's Office of Education and Innovation and working with our partners at Resultant to create a dashboard that we call Connect Indy that then kind of catalogs the unique strengths and needs across the city so that coordinators have a good idea. They can kind of look and see is this a trend just in my building, or is this something that's happening in the other buildings closer to me? But then also so that policymakers and community partners can look at that information and decide where to best put their resources as well. So they can sign on it and say like, hey, we've got a lot of kids that are struggling with family related issues. We're going to start, as we grow and expand, we're going to try to move into this area because it looks like a good use of our resources. Even on the student interest side, for a partner who was maybe thinking about starting a new program, they can look and see like, there's a lot of kids in this area that would really love a chance to participate in a cooking class. We're going to put some resources into that effort as well. And so it's creating that kind of responsive dashboard map based on this information for the city of Indianapolis as well. And again, then we have the coordinators and our team at Marion who then work at how do we analyze this? Because it's not just a number. There are names and faces attached to that. And we want to remember the stories that go along with that as well, so that those resources and that response is done in an effective way. So that's us, that's the model. With my team, there's several people in my role as program manager, but I've also put the contact information for our director and assistant director at Marion who help out run this as well, if there's further questions from like a policy or implementation side. But then
my one question I just asked when you said it, where is Marion in all of this?
So-
They're on everything and I just didn't.
Yeah, so as part of the, what do we do about student learning loss post-COVID, Marion was granted oversight of the expansion of City Connects into Indiana. And so we partner then with Boston College to help it from like the research arm, which is what kind of keeps everything running. But our office then focuses on the Indiana implementation side of that.
The reason I asked Marion is in my district.
Ah, lovely.
They trying to do a lot.
They are.
You kind of gotta pull the reins on them, and so I would just.
Yeah, so Marion from the state level then was granted oversight of how do we expand this into Indiana and make sure that we do it right.
Questions from the CISC?
I have one. Do you have data around the schools before you were involved and after for related to youth arrested for truancy?
Not to my knowledge, but that's something I could certainly put that out with some of the demographic research we've been doing to pass on.
You mentioned that you're in 15 Indiana schools, is that right?
That's ones that I directly have my hands
Okay.
in. We're currently working with 45 to 50
Okay.
around the state.
And is that every level, elementary, middle school, high school?
Kind of the model is best suited for an elementary implementation, but there's kind of the common sense knowledge of like, if we give kids what they need, regardless of their age, they're going to do better. So we have a few high schools, and we're also spread across public, non-public, and charters as well.
And how is the program funded?
Variety of ways. So we have some schools that have integrated it into their own budgets every year. And then through a variety of grant application and awards. We're currently working pretty heavily with the Lilly Endowment to try to expand with that as well, and have a lot of schools that will be coming on with that. So some are working it into their own budgets. We always try to find the funds to pay for our fees so that schools are not responsible for that, but a variety of ways.
Okay. Other questions from the members? All right, thank you very much. Next up, we will move on to Mark's executive report and legislative affairs update.
All right, and I'll ask permission to present while seated since I have all kinds of fun stuff up front of me that I have to comb through this time of year. Lots going on. We'll get to legislative affairs in a second. I did want to do just a quick follow-up on our Day of the Child activities. This is something the commission's been a part of for a long time, partnering with the Indiana Youth Institute and McCoy. You may remember last year we did our first time where we actually did as a widespread invitation of getting youth to the State House. That's where we partnered with McCoy to bring that on in. See what would happen. So that is on Monday, President's Day. Last year was the experiment to see how many kids would actually want to take their day off of school and show up at the State House and be a part of things. We wound up with well over 300 participating. This year, registrations are over 600. So incredible to see. And really, when we talk about civic engagement and all the ways we want to have youth voices integrated in what we do, it's really cool to see that many wanting to take that day off and be there and be present. So excited to see that. We'll have activities throughout the day. At 10 a.m. will be the State of the Child Address led by the Indiana Youth Institute. I'll be speaking briefly at that. Judge Kenworthy will be doing some opening remarks as well. Ellie Leonard, our youth representative, was voluntold to also be a part of that because we want to make sure we're showcasing the good work that they do for the commission as well. So it'll be a very exciting day. And of course, if you see plenty of youth roaming around the State House, as always, stop them, see what they're there for and what they're interested in. We want to make sure they understand just how approachable our state government is for them. We will also be having day 2 activities where we're doing a series of youth and family engagement workshops. This is a new one, but basically saying you got kind of the preview on day 1, you got a little bit of a taste of things, but if you're wanting to elevate and get directly involved in policy work and learn how that works and how you can be more effective, let's offer you some more intense training on just how that can work for you. So we have several dozen signed up for that, still growing by the day. We're hoping some of the day 1 folks too will show an interest in coming over for that. They'll be here at the Government Center where we do that, and we start building up that next round of youth champions that want to get engaged in the work. So very exciting stuff, a lot of growth all at once going on in that space, but truly impressed by how much our Hoosier youth really want to be involved in the work we're doing. So that energizes everything we do when we get to see that. It's very, very encouraging. More information, Blaine has a flyer that's circulated around, but also feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any other information you want to get as part of that, or what you want to do with that, or if you want to make sure that if there's any youth from your area roaming around the State House, we get you connected there. And we're happy to make that happen however we can. So very cool stuff going on there. Now for the less exciting part of the day for most of you, legislative affairs. We have a few updates on the two main bills that are coming directly through the commission's activities. And then I have several others on the list that are ones that were brought to our attention as session unfolded that we want to consider diving into a little bit more deeply as we go in there. So our two big ones, first, I'll start by noting that they are both alive and well. It is close to that halfway point of legislative session where we're wondering what's going to happen next. First and foremost, our major bill is 1098, and that is family, youth, and caregiver engagement. This does a few things, but mostly it puts into code the priority of the state to say we're going to have a focus point for all the engagement efforts that are going on across the state, and the Children's Commission is going to coordinate that. So we're going to bring that together. We're going to look at how we can support, grow, work with, cooperate, collaborate, all the great initiatives that are going on, both at the state agency level. We've got great work through the Youth Advisory Board, the Department of Health and DMHA puts together. We've got a lot of external groups that we work with as well that are doing incredible things. But as we've spoken to them, all of them were looking for a way to share more uniformly together, collect those voices, gain supports, learn from each other. So that's what we're looking at doing there. And part of that will be creating within the CISC a place to do that, and the creation of a state plan for what family and youth engagement is really going to look like. Recently, we did add to that list. You've heard us talk a lot about family and youth engagement. We did add caregiver, making sure that we're incorporating foster parents, other forms of informal caregivers, and folks that are directly involved in those youth lives. We have a lot of youth we work with that when you ask who their number one person is, it's not necessarily going to be a family member, but we want to make sure those people aren't left out. So integrating that. That does come with a small fiscal that was enough to hire one more coordinator. That's been pulled out of the bill and put into the House budget proposal. So we expect that to go through. Hopefully things stay nicely there. And then we'll have a Blaine Part 2 joining the team. That's the informal name for now. We don't know if it's going to stick. I don't know if I can find another person named Blaine that wants the job, but that's where we're at for now. That's what I'm thinking. And we've got really tall Blaines. Maybe if I get a short one, it'll be fun. But again, that's for record, that's not prejudicial hiring practices. That would just be fun. Okay. So as that goes through, we'll keep you all posted on that. But right now, it looks like it's got to cross over to the second half just fine. Great language in it and stuff that I think everybody in state government and across our state can support, and saying, yeah, we need to do absolutely every can to make sure those voices are supported and supported well. And they inform our policy in such important ways. We're missing out if we don't integrate them. So good work there on 1098 going forward. Our other major bill, House Bill 1403, looks like it's up for second readings tomorrow. So that one's on a nice journey as well. This is that next phase of the Youth Justice Oversight Committee. So originated out of the Children's Commission, spun off on its own, has had some grant funding attached to it as well, pretty substantial from the state. And right now we're looking at what the next phase of that's going to be. So what's in code currently just basically says, well, your job is to get a plan out there to get these grants flowing. But those groups are all meeting regularly on data support, behavioral health needs, transitional services, diversion services. How can we continue supporting that kind of work across the state? So it puts into code, basically, those groups will continue meeting and they'll continue doing the good work, and they'll continue getting some support from the Children's Commission and the courts as well to do that. The second part is looking directly at the grant funds, making sure we have the proper flexibility to make sure the intended recipients of those grant funds, often are small and rural communities, have the ability to make use of those funds effectively and apply for them. It's a lot of work going for grants, and if you don't have the right support system in place, or you have too many rules and structures on it that inhibit your ability to pilot some things locally, you might not go for those funds. So it's got some language in there that we hope helps out with that, and also makes it so the funding formula can adapt as we learn. So we think we've got a good idea. This happens a lot of times in state policies. We thought we put the right stuff in place to get the small communities willing to go for these funds. We didn't see quite as many applications as we would have hoped for. So let's adapt that. And let's make sure that we are listening to what they're saying is holding it back so we can get those funds where they need to go. So that's 1403, the next phase of that initiative that's really taken on a great life of its own, that the commission still supports. Looks like that's moving into the second half just fine there as well. So, so the overarching, our main bills going well, moving along well. 1098, Dale Devon and Vanessa Summers are on that, of course. And then 1403, Representative McNamara, and I believe Victoria Garcia Wilburn has signed on to that one as well. So good things for the second half. Other bills that were brought forward, I'll talk on briefly because I know we've got others that can talk more. We do have a couple of bills on absenteeism that are going through. The biggest two would be 482, Senate Bill 482 by Stacy Donato, who's not able to be here today, but I do have some notes from her that I'll run through. And then a similar language in Bob Baining's bill 1201 on the other side of the aisle. So those are probably the two that are going to play together and figure out what the final language is. There's still a lot of discussion going on. Main things they're looking at is, can we look at a clear definition of what is defined as chronically absent? Right now, that language is looking like missing 10% or more in a school year for any reason. So that's not necessarily saying we're looking at truancy here, but saying at this point, this is students having a hard time attending school on a regular enough basis, and we need to look a little bit deeper. It's also looking at establishing a categorization system for absences to distinguish clearly between excused and unexcused, and how that can be disseminated to the local schools. There's a lot of variation in the data collection right now, which makes it really hard to decide where we need to intervene and what we're intervening with. So as schools are looking at that differently and developing their own systems, it ties our hands to say, how can we support you best? So that'll be a nice piece there as well. It also allows prosecuting attorneys, if something is getting on the grounds of counting towards truancy, to hold one or more, they're calling them attendance intervention meetings before the filing of an affidavit. So before we're looking at direct justice involvement, what can we do to say, let's try a couple more things. Let's get together, look at resources, look at things like, if we have City Connects, if we have communities in schools, we have some other programming going on through maybe our Youth Service Bureau. What can we do to try to mitigate going to that next level? And how is that going to work there? Again, more definitional things, talking about what qualifies as an absent student, making sure that we're not lumping in things like medical appointments, therapy, IEP, service plan, 504 plan, absence is into that unexcused bucket as we go through there. And finally, and this is still a point where they're working out the final product on, as looking at can a student be expelled purely based on chronic absenteeism? And we know from the outside that looks like, well, that's bad practice. Of course, you're missing a lot of school, so our answer is we'll stop coming to school. But there's some other tools that are accessible to schools when they start an expulsion hearing. So we're looking at, is there a way to access those tools without having to go to that step? It's tough. You're always looking for the balance of, sometimes we need teeth to get people's attention, but other times it's really about engaging them and welcoming them back into the fold too. So these bills are really trying to strike that balance. I think there's going to be more adapting as we go through. But note, a lot of what we're talking about there is the exact stuff that we found in the Best Youth Discovery. So good work though. As a state, we're all looking at the same items. We're still figuring out what that's going to look like at the end of the day, but we're on the same page together. So that's good. Sometimes we're not even in the same book. So same page, we're reading it a little bit differently, different context, but we're getting very close to those things. And I think the next phase of the discussion is going to be, what are some of those programs we need to be uplifting locally? So when if we have some of these meetings, if we have other resource meetings at the school level before we're getting into chronic absence concerns, what do we have to offer, especially in our resource low communities? The Youth Justice Oversight Committee grants could be a big part of that, because diversion and community alternatives and behavioral health are all right there, and there's a lot of dollars attached to that. So I think as we grow, we're going to see these two efforts merge together a lot more than maybe we anticipated when we created them. But we're talking a lot of the same things. And that's, of course, those funds aren't just for chronic absence, but that's a primary symptom most of the time when there's some of those other things going on. So exciting stuff going on in that space. So again, that's me channeling most of the feedback I got from Senator Donato and her team on that, but definitely something that's already on our list that we're engaged with. So I'm not asking to say that we need permission to add this. I think we've been talking chronic absence long enough. This is definitely high on our list of priorities there. With that, I've got three other bills listed that I think other people could probably talk on at more detail than I am. So just really briefly, House Bill 1107, funding for family recovery courts. And this I gave brief testimony on Monday. House Bill 1485, court appointed counsel for certain minors, and Ailey and Julia brought this to attention of one that we want to look at. Is there a solution going forward? I will note that that's a bill that's probably not moving this session, but the author has reached out to myself and to our youth reps to say, let's find a way to figure out how we get there. And then House Bill 1605 that looks at a lot of items related to the juvenile justice system, specifically a lot of work on how do we get that time to permanency timeline shrunk down a little bit while still staying within procedure. So again, those are all ones that are a little bit further away from me. I don't know if Judge Kenworthy, you want to start on 1107?
So this 1107 would merely create a fund. There is no fiscal ask attached to that bill. And so it passed out of the Committee on Judiciary unanimously 13-0 on Monday, but then was assigned to Ways and Means. And I haven't seen that it's gotten scheduled for a hearing in Ways and Means. So that's concerning at this point. Do know that there is no fiscal impact. So we've been reaching out to legislators just to clarify that. Fingers crossed that they will hear it and consider it this session. And then I will.
Judge, if I could on that, our budget request included a request for funding specifically for family recovery courts as well. So we're kind of going at it from two angles. So I don't know if part of the process is it goes through one or the other, but we were supportive of that bill as well.
Who did you reach out to, you know, legislator wise?
So I've been speaking with Victoria Garcia Wilburn, who authored the bill. I texted last night with Representative Clear, and then I've been reaching out to all 23 family recovery court judges, and they've been reaching out to the legislators in their own districts. So that's most recently, I will say.
I could check out Jeff Thompson as chair of Ways and Means, and maybe he can give us direction on that. So
That would be wonderful. And I would note that last session, the Safe Baby Courts bill passed almost unanimously. There were 2 votes against in the Senate. And this would be a subset of family recovery courts. So it would support something that was very popular in the legislature last session.
So yeah, and sometimes we know at this point in the session, they play cautious and something's labeled fund. So they want to check it out and look a little bit more closely. But main thing is it creates a non-reverting place for the existing allocations that we ask for, but also a place where donations, grants, and other funds can go to help support that model. So hopefully that's something we can keep on moving. 1485, looking at the council for specific youth. This was looking at residential care and appointing counsel for those individuals. I don't know if Ailey and Julia, if you wanted to say anything more on that one.
Well, all I'll say is that while we do recognize that it's probably not going to pass this session, this is kind of a topic that Julia and I have both been passionate about personally, given our unique situations. And for me, at least, having the court appointed attorney in one case for one parent and then not in the other county for my other parent, it did make a huge difference. So it is something that I think we'll continue to look to advocate and support. Yeah.
And I second what Ali said. It's an extremely important bill to me personally, just due to my lived experience, and I am looking forward to see where we can still go with it.
Yeah, and I'll add, as I've talked to various groups, as we're looking on getting our lived experience component of the CISC elevated further and further up. This is a regular one we're hearing is we've got to find a way to make sure that kids that can benefit from having that direct representation by an attorney have access to it better. So as much as there's, we get lots of talk about cost and attorney shortage and everything else, this has been an issue that's floated around in the General Assembly for several years. Our youth are talking to us about it, and we need to find a way that we can at least help navigate the discussion and find a path forward there. So I think that is a good place to look at if that's something that we want to add formally to one of the priorities of the commission. Not saying this specific bill is our priority, but can we make the issue a priority to at least investigate that further?
I can add a little bit. I know we talked about this, and Indiana is one of the few states in the nation that doesn't have that, but I know our CASA volunteers, right, and guardian ad litem items are crucial. But at the same time, I'd love to hear more from our judges. So especially at the probate level, you know, and we can talk about that later though, but I'd love to have a deeper dive on that with our judges.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit in general terms, and that is that I think any judge that sits on a juvenile case would love to give each youth everything, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And the problem is that most communities simply don't have the number of attorneys that we need right now to cover parent attorney status. And so I think there's just a real challenge in resource level across the state, with rural counties, again, struggling the most with lack of attorneys. Sure. 1605 is a 30-page bill related to Chens and termination cases. There's a lot of stuff in there. I will pull out the two provisions that I think have drawn the most concern, at least feedback that I've been receiving. And that is the mandatory intervention of foster parents in certain circumstances. There's also a provision that would allow foster parents to request the court set hearings, additional hearings. And then another portion of the statute would set timelines strictly, restrict those. So parents could no longer waive the timelines for fact-finding hearings and termination of parental rights proceedings. And all of those are concerning from the judicial perspective, because life happens, and when you're restricting things such that there's no flexibility any longer, that becomes problematic, can become problematic. There's another provision that would allow foster parents or say explicitly that foster parents, caregivers, placements for children are welcome in the hearings. And I think that's good. I think placement should be welcome in the hearings. There may be certain circumstances where they would need to step out so they didn't hear other testimony or something like that in a fact finding. But we definitely need to be embracing our folks who are taking care of these kids, because we need the information that they have taking care of these kids 24/7. But the intervention will cause the same problem or create the same problem when we're talking about additional attorneys. If they're party status, then we're going to have another party, another attorney necessary to the case, and that, you're taxing the system again. Currently, intervention is discretionary, so foster parents can seek intervention and court can grant that if certain findings are made already. And so creating a mandatory category seems unnecessary, and it could have local fiscal impact. And that's what I'm hearing from judicial officers across the state, that we simply don't have, number one, the number of attorneys to handle this. And number two, we don't have the resources to pay additional attorneys to do these cases. So I think once again, we want to give everyone the sun, the moon, the stars, and there's simply a lack of resources in certain areas.
Yeah, and certainly, again, time to permanency is something that we're all concerned about and working on as broadly as we can. There's a lot to it, and there's always unintended consequences when we pull one lever that another one goes the wrong direction too. But I think it's fair to say that the commission, still wants to be a part of that discussion wherever we can, and when we can find solutions, by all means, let's do everything we can in that space. So a lot of good intentions and a lot of things that need ironed out there, but hopefully that's something that as it moves through session, which it looks like it's moving along okay, there's opportunities to do that and make sure that we have everybody on board. So those are the ones that have been brought to me directly, but do we have any commission members that have any other legislation that they want to bring up or suggest that the commission be keeping an eye on? I've still got about 200 bills on my watch list, so I'm okay not adding too many just now, but we're getting to the halfway point where we streamline things more and make sure we're focusing our energy where we can and have the most effect on that. So I appreciate everybody that's been able to be a part of those discussions ongoing. It's been a busy few months with the transition and everything else. So I really do appreciate how engaged everybody's been. It lets us in this new-ish endeavor of getting more deeply involved in legislative affairs, make sure we're doing it the right way. And we're representing the commission for what it is and what it stands for. So I really do appreciate that.
All right, at this point in the agenda, we turn to our members for announcements, items for discussion, anything that this group should be aware of that's going on in your respective agencies. Let's start on this end at this time. Chris, you want to start?
Nope, nothing to add today. Thank you.
Justin?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Mark? Representative Vaughn? Dr. Weaver? This,
Thank you.
the quiet group today. How about you, Ally? All right, turning to our online members, Julia, anything you would like to add?
Nope.
Okay, Bernice?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
All right, look at that. We've got about 23 extra minutes in our day, so we will be adjourned. Thank you all for being here today.